At 07:42 on the morning of March 6, 1945, an American tank crew sat frozen in the rubble-choked streets of Cologne. Two Sherman tanks had just rolled into an intersection ahead of them. They stopped. Across the street, hidden behind shattered masonry and smoke, a German Panther rotated its gun. Inside the American turret, Corporal Clarence Smuyer watched through his gun sight as the Panther fired. Once, the shell punched straight through the first Sherman's gun shield. A second round followed almost instantly, striking within inches of the first. Inside the tank, 3 American crewmen were killed where they sat. Smoke poured from the hatch. A commander tried to escape, crawling out with his leg torn away below the knee. The Panther did not move forward. It did not fire again. It simply waited. Smuyer did not know it yet, but he was watching the end of one kind of war and the beginning of another. Because behind his gun sight, he was sitting inside a tank the I-tier Germans did not recognize, and in less than an hour it would destroy the best Panther they had left in the city. By March of 1945, scenes like this were no longer shocking to American tank crews. They were expected. For nearly a year, U.S. armored units had been fighting German Panthers and Tigers with tanks that were never designed for that fight. The Sherman was fast, reliable, easy to produce. It was built to support infantry, not to hunt enemy armor head-on. But the war in Europe refused to follow American doctrine. German tanks carried thicker armor, longer guns, and better optics. Their 75mm and 88mm cannons could punch through a Sherman steel at distances where American rounds bounced harmlessly away. In battle after battle, Sherman crews learned the truth the hard way. If your tank was hit, you had seconds to escape before the ammunition ignited. If you didn't get out, the tank became a furnace. During the winter fighting only 3 months earlier, entire American companies had lost half their vehicles in a single day. Men kept fighting. The tanks kept burning. The solution had existed for years. As early as 1942, American engineers had designed a heavier tank with thicker armor and a more powerful gun. Prototype after prototype rolled off the test grounds, and each time the answer was the same: too heavy, too slow, too complicated. American commanders believed the Sherman was good enough. Tank destroyers, they insisted, would deal with enemy armor. Reality disagreed. By the time the Battle of the Bulge shattered that illusion, thousands of American tankers had already paid the price. Only then did the order finally come. A new tank would be rushed to Europe, not to change the war, just to survive it. And on this street in Cologne, one of those tanks was about to prove why it should have arrived years earlier. In January of 1945, the first of the new tanks finally reached Europe. They arrived quietly, unloaded at the port of Antwerp under winter skies, with no ceremony and no headlines. There were only 20 of them. That was all the United States could spare at the time. They were designated M26 Pershings. To the men who had spent months fighting inside Shermans, the difference was immediately obvious. The Pershing was heavier, nearly 50 tons of steel instead of 30. Its frontal armor was twice as thick, and mounted in its turret was a 90mm gun powerful enough to penetrate any German tank it faced. But power came with a cost. The Pershing was slower, harder to maneuver. Its weight strained bridges and transmissions alike. It was not a tank built for sweeping advances across open fields. It was a tank built for survival. Crews were rushed through training. There was no time for long instruction courses or careful doctrine revisions. Veteran tankers were pulled from the line and handed a new machine with unfamiliar quirks and unfamiliar risks. Clarence Smuyer's crew was one of them. They had fought together since Normandy. They had survived hedgerows, winter forests, and burning Shermans. Now they were told they would take a different tank into combat, one that could finally fight back. By late February, the Pershings entered combat for the first time. Some were lost, others destroyed German tanks at ranges Shermans could never survive. Word spread quickly through American units. At last, there was something that could meet a Panther on equal terms. But by then, the war was almost over. And the places where it was still being fought were the worst places imaginable for a heavy tank. Cities, and none was more dangerous than Cologne. The Pershings were sent to the front with no illusions. There were too few of them to change the outcome of the war, and too little time left to refine how they would be used. They were not a new doctrine, they were a correction. After arriving in Antwerp, the tanks were rushed inland to a maintenance facility near the German border. There, selected crews were brought in from veteran armored divisions. The army did not assign these tanks to inexperienced men. They sent their best. Clarence Smooyer's crew arrived in mid-February. They had spent months fighting together inside a Sherman, learning each other's movements by instinct. Now they climbed into a tank that felt immediately different. The controls were familiar enough, but everything else felt heavier. The turret moved more slowly. The engine strained under the added weight. When the Pershing stopped, the ground beneath it seemed to settle. Then came the gun. During training, each crew was allowed to fire only a handful of rounds. Ammunition was scarce, and the tanks were needed at the front as quickly as possible. When Smooyer fired the 90mm gun for the first time, the recoil slammed through the turret. The muzzle blast was violent, flattening grass, dust, and debris far beyond the target. The sound alone told the story. This was not a Sherman's gun. The Pershing could kill a Panther from the front. That single fact changed everything for the men inside it. For the first time in the war, American tankers could face German armor without knowing they were already outmatched. But confidence came with new pressure. The Pershing was rare. Every crew knew it. If one was lost, it could not be easily replaced. Breakdowns were common. Bridges collapsed under its weight. Streets that Shermans crossed without trouble became traps for a tank nearly 50 tons heavy. And in cities, power mattered less than position. By late February, the Pershings entered combat along the Roer River. One was knocked out almost immediately by a hidden German tank. Others proved their worth, destroying Panthers at ranges that would have been suicide for a Sherman. The reports traveled fast. By early March, the 3rd Armored Division was ordered east toward the Rhine. Ahead of them stood Cologne, Germany's 4th largest city. Shattered by hundreds of bombing raids, its streets turned into narrow corridors of rubble and shadow. Inside that city, German rearguard units still waited, and among them were Panther crews who had no idea that something new had arrived to hunt them. Cologne was no longer a city. It was a maze of ruins. By March of 1945, more than 200 Allied bombing raids had torn it apart. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to broken stone and twisted steel. Streets that once carried trams and crowds had become narrow canyons of rubble. For tank crews, it was one of the most dangerous environments imaginable. Every intersection was a firing position. Every basement window could hide an anti-tank gun. German infantry had learned how to turn the city itself into a weapon. Underground tunnels connected buildings beneath the streets, allowing soldiers to appear behind American lines, attack, and vanish again before anyone could respond. Panzerfaust teams waited in doorways and collapsed stairwells, firing at point-blank range where armor thickness meant nothing. In cities, tanks did not die from distance. They died from proximity. The Pershing's thick armor and powerful gun mattered less here. Its weight limited where it could go. Many bridges could not support it. Streets that Shermans crossed easily became traps where a broken track or hidden mine could immobilize the tank in seconds. Moving slowly was dangerous. Moving quickly was worse. As Clarence Smooyer's Pershing rolled deeper into Cologne, the crew advanced block by block, stopping every few dozen yards to check for rubble, craters, or wires stretched across the road. The tank's engine echoed off the shattered buildings, announcing its presence long before it came into view. Above the ruins, 2 towers rose untouched. The spires of Cologne Cathedral still stood, looming over the destruction like stone sentinels. They were visible from almost anywhere in the city, used as reference points on every map and in every radio transmission. And they marked the most dangerous ground of all. Wide streets opened into open squares near the cathedral, creating long sight lines that favored German gunners. American units knew that enemy armor was still operating nearby, covering these approaches. On the morning of March 6th, reports began coming in over the radio. Sherman tanks were taking fire near the cathedral district. German armor had not withdrawn across the Rhine. It was waiting, and Clarence Smooyer's Pershing was about to be sent straight toward it. Shortly after dawn, the orders came down. Clarence Smooyer's Pershing would move to the front of the column. It was not framed as an honor. Everyone understood what it meant. The Pershing would be first through every major intersection, first into every open avenue, first to draw fire from any German gun still hidden in the ruins. The logic was simple. If the Germans were waiting with anti-tank weapons, they would reveal themselves against the heaviest armor available. If enemy tanks were still operating in the city, the Pershing was the only American vehicle that could survive a direct encounter. That made it both the spearhead and the shield. Smooyer's crew prepared in silence. They checked ammunition stowage, tightened straps, and verified radio frequencies. No one spoke more than necessary. Every man inside the tank had been under fire before. They knew that urban fighting offered no warning and no forgiveness. The Pershing began moving shortly after 8 o'clock. It advanced at walking speed, its tracks clanking over broken pavement and crushed brick. Infantry followed close behind, hugging the walls and doorways. Shermans covered side streets where they could, but the widest avenues belonged to the Pershing alone. As they moved closer to the city center, the radio traffic changed. Reports came in faster now. Sherman units were taking casualties near the cathedral district. German machine guns were pinning down infantry. Anti-tank fire had been confirmed from multiple directions. Then came the message that mattered most. German tanks had been sighted near the cathedral square. At least 2 Panthers, possibly more. American infantry had pulled back after taking losses. 2 Shermans had already been sent forward to investigate. Smooyer felt his mouth go dry as the transmission ended. The Pershing had never faced a Panther in a city before, and somewhere ahead, German tank crews were already waiting for them to arrive. The 2 Shermans reached the cathedral district just before 10 o'clock. They advanced without infantry support, moving cautiously along the northern approaches to the square. Rubble blocked most side streets, forcing them onto the open avenues that led directly toward the cathedral's towering spires. It was the worst possible ground for a medium tank. As the lead Sherman crept forward, its crew scanned windows and alleyways, expecting infantry fire. What they did not see was the Panther waiting beyond the square, its hull tucked behind shattered stone, its gun already laid on the approach. The first shot came without warning. A 75mm round slammed into the Sherman's turret, punching straight through the armor. The impact echoed across the square like a hammer strike. Before the crew could react, a second round followed. The tank shuddered and stopped, smoke pouring from the open hatches. One crewman fell as he tried to escape. Another never made it out. The second Sherman attempted to reverse, its engine roaring as the driver searched desperately for cover. The Panther fired again. The round struck the Sherman along its flank, tearing through the thinner side armor. The tank lurched, then fell silent, disabled in the open. Within seconds, both American tanks were out of the fight. The cathedral square went quiet. From behind cover, German infantry watched the wrecks burn. The Panther held its position, its crew disciplined and patient, covering every approach that led into the square. American infantry units pulled back, pinned down by machine gun fire and unable to advance, while the German tank controlled the open ground. Radio transmissions erupted across the net. Shermans destroyed. Enemy Panther confirmed. Position near the cathedral. There was only one American tank in the area capable of facing it. As Clarence Smooyer listened from inside the Pershing, the meaning was clear. What the Shermans had just suffered was not a warning. It was an invitation, and the Pershing was already on its way. From their position 1 block back, the Pershing's crew could see the aftermath. A Sherman sat motionless at the edge of the square, its gun tube angled skyward, smoke still drifting from the commander's hatch. Farther north, another tank lay disabled behind rubble, its crew nowhere in sight. Staff. Sergeant Robert Early studied the scene through his vision blocks. The German tank had not moved. That told him everything. This was not a panicked shot or a fleeting encounter. The Panther had chosen its position carefully. Somewhere near the cathedral square, it sat in ambush, covering every open approach with overlapping fields of fire. Early dismounted from the Pershing and moved forward on foot, staying close to the shattered buildings. An Army Signal Corps cameraman followed him, carrying a 16mm camera. He had already filmed the Shermans being destroyed. Now he wanted to see what came next. From the corner of a ruined building, Early spotted it. The Panther was partially concealed behind a side street near the square, its angular turret facing north, its long 75mm gun pointed directly down the avenue where the Shermans had approached. From that position, the German crew could dominate the entire plaza. Any American tank that entered the square head-on would expose its side armor almost immediately. It was a perfect killing ground. Early crouched behind cover and worked through the geometry in his mind. The distance across the square was just over 100 yards. At that range, both tanks could penetrate each other's armor. Whoever fired first would likely win. But the Panther's gun was already laid on the main approach. If the Pershing drove straight in, it would be staring down the barrel of a German cannon before it could even stop. There was only one way to change the odds. A narrow side street ran parallel to the main avenue, hidden from the Panther's view. If the Pershing could use that route, it could enter the square from the west, catching the German tank at a right angle. Side armor, one shot, maybe two. That was all there would be time for. Early returned to the Pershing and climbed back inside. He explained the plan quickly and clearly. There would be no hesitation once they committed. If the Panther saw them first, they would not survive. As the Pershing's engine rumbled to life, Clarence Smooyer rotated the turret to the right, setting his gun in anticipation of the turn. Ahead of them, the cathedral spires rose through the smoke, and somewhere near their base, a German gunner waited, unaware that the fight was about to change direction. The Pershing turned off the main avenue and entered the side street at 0958. The road was barely wide enough for the tank's bulk. Rubble scraped against the tracks as McVeigh guided the Pershing forward, keeping the speed steady. Too slow, and they would be an easy target. Too fast, and Smooyer would never be able to aim. Inside the turret, no one spoke. Smooyer pressed his eye against the gun sight, watching the corner ahead where the street opened into the cathedral square. The turret was already traversed 90 degrees to the right, the gun waiting for a target that had not yet appeared. DeRiggy loaded an armor-piercing round and locked the breech. The heavy shell sat ready, its brass casing warm under his hands. There would be no time to change ammunition once they entered the intersection. 20 yards, 30. The engine noise echoed off the walls, carrying down the street and into the open square beyond. The Panther crew would hear them coming. The only question was how quickly they would understand where the sound was coming from. McVeigh kept the throttle steady as the Pershing approached the corner. The front of the tank began to emerge from the shadows, sunlight breaking across the glacis plate. The cathedral spires filled the forward vision blocks. Smooyer felt the tension tighten in his chest as the corner slid past his sight. This was the moment where everything narrowed to seconds. If the Panther's gun was already trained on them, there would be no second chance. If it wasn't, the Pershing rolled forward, and the square opened around them. The Pershing entered the cathedral square at 09:59. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, Smooyer saw it. The Panther sat just over 100 yards away, exactly where Early had predicted, its hull angled slightly, its turret already beginning to rotate. The long German gun swung toward them, dark and unmistakable. For the Panther's crew, something was wrong. The tank rolling into the square did not look like a Sherman. It was lower, heavier, its armor sloped at unfamiliar angles. For an instant, the German commander hesitated. Was it American? Was it German? That hesitation lasted less than a second, but it was enough. McVeigh did not stop the tank. Stopping would freeze them in the open. A stationary tank was a dead tank. He pushed the throttle forward instead, carrying the Pershing deeper into the intersection. Inside the turret, Smooyer did not wait for the suspension to settle. American tanks were rarely fired on the move. The gun was not stabilized. Accuracy dropped sharply, but waiting meant giving the Panther time to fire first. He adjusted instinctively, compensating for the movement, and squeezed the trigger. The 90mm gun fired with a concussion that filled the turret. The armor-piercing round crossed the square in a heartbeat and struck the Panther's turret just below the gun mantlet. Sparks and fragments burst outward as the shell bit into German steel. It was a solid hit, but the Panther was still alive. McVeigh brought the Pershing to a hard stop in the middle of the square, fully exposed beneath the cathedral spires. DeRiggy was already moving, slamming a second armor-piercing round into the breech and locking it home. Smooyer never took his eye from the sight. The Panther's turret was still turning. He lowered his aim, targeting the thinner side armor beneath the turret ring, and fired again. The second round punched clean through the Panther's side, ripping through the fighting compartment and exiting the far armor plate. Inside the German tank, hydraulics ruptured, ammunition ignited, smoke and flame filled the turret, hatches flew open. German crewmen scrambled out, leaping from the burning tank and running for cover as fire spread rapidly through the hull. Smooyer fired a third time. The round struck low, near the turret base, and the Panther erupted into flame. Within seconds, the tank was engulfed, burning fiercely in the center of the square. The duel was over. From first shot to final fire, it had lasted less than a minute. Beneath the cathedral that had watched centuries of war, the most feared German tank in the city burned uncontested. Inside the Pershing, no one cheered. Smooyer leaned back from the gun sight, his hands shaking, the echo of the gun still ringing in his ears. They were alive. The Panther was not. And for the first time that morning, the square belonged to the Americans. The fighting did not end with the Panther burning. As American infantry moved forward to secure the Cathedral District, the Pershing was ordered deeper into the city. The streets narrowed again, closing in around the tank like a corridor of broken stone. It was early afternoon when it happened. The Pershing approached a small intersection lined by shattered apartment buildings. Dust hung in the air. Smoke drifted low across the street. Visibility was poor, and every doorway felt dangerous. Then a car appeared. It came suddenly from a side street, moving fast, its engine echoing sharply off the ruins. To Smooyer, it looked like a military staff car. Civilians were not supposed to be there. Most had fled weeks earlier or were hiding underground. In urban combat, anything that moved without warning was a threat. Smooyer fired the coaxial machine gun. Tracer rounds streaked across the intersection, striking the vehicle's body panels and windshield. At the same moment, from a concealed position to the left, a German tank opened fire with its own machine gun. The car jerked violently. Glass shattered. The engine died. It rolled to a stop in the middle of the street. For a brief moment, everything went quiet. Then the passenger door fell open. A figure tumbled out and lay motionless on the cobblestones. Smooyer stared through the sight, frozen. He could not tell who had fired the fatal shot. The American tracers had hit the car. So had the German fire. In the chaos of the street, there was no way to know whose bullets had found their mark. The German tank withdrew, backing deeper into the ruins before the Pershing could engage it. Infantry rushed forward, weapons raised, shouting for movement. But the figure on the street did not move. The Pershing rolled past the intersection minutes later, leaving the car behind. Inside the turret, Clarence Smooyer said nothing, but the image followed him. Not the Panther burning beneath the cathedral, not the German crew running from their tank. The car, the door opening, and the body falling into the street. That was the moment that did not end when the war did. Within weeks, the war in Germany was over. American forces crossed the Rhine. German resistance collapsed unevenly, sometimes violently, sometimes without a fight at all. Towns surrendered, units dissolved, orders stopped coming. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Clarence Smooyer survived. He returned home later that year, stepping off a troop ship into a country that was celebrating, rebuilding, and eager to move on. He found work. He married. He built a life that, from the outside, looked ordinary and steady. But the war did not stay behind in Europe. At night, Cologne returned. He dreamed of ruined streets and echoing gunfire, of the cathedral spires rising through smoke, of the Panther burning in the square, and always of the car. The black shape racing into the intersection, the tracers cutting through the air, the door opening, the body falling. He did not know who she was. He did not know if his bullets had killed her or if the German tank's fire had done it instead. In the confusion of that street, certainty had been impossible. What he knew was simpler and heavier. He had fired. For decades, the image stayed with him. It surfaced in quiet moments, in half-remembered dreams, in the long spaces between words he never spoke out loud. Medals were awarded. Footage of the cathedral battle appeared in newsreels and documentaries. The Pershing became a museum piece. The Panther became a photograph in a book. But none of that touched the memory that followed him home. The war had given him a victory he could never fully accept, and a question that would not let him go. Who was she? The answer came almost 70 years later. In the early 2010s, a German journalist researching the battle for Cologne uncovered records that had never been connected to the tank duel beneath the cathedral. Civilian casualty lists, witness accounts, police reports filed in the final days of the war. One name appeared again and again: Käthe Esser. She was 26 years old, the youngest of 4 sisters. She worked as a clerk in a small grocery store and cared for her aging parents while the city around them collapsed. On the morning of March 6, 1945, she and her employer attempted to flee Cologne, believing the fighting had moved on. They were wrong. Their car entered an intersection controlled by tanks on both sides. The journalist traced the location, the timing, the trajectory of fire. It matched the moment Clarence Smooyer had carried with him since that afternoon in the ruins. For the first time, the image had a name. When Smooyer learned who she was, the weight did not lessen. It deepened. The years between the war and that moment collapsed into a single point of understanding. She had not been a symbol. She had not been an abstraction. She had been a young woman trying to escape a city that had already destroyed almost everything else. And now, at last, Clarence Smooyer knew who had fallen from the car door onto the stones of Cologne. He asked only one thing: to return, to stand where it had happened, and to say what he had never been able to say before. In 2013, Clarence Smooyer returned to Cologne. He was 89 years old. The city had been rebuilt, its streets clean and busy, its scars softened by time. But the cathedral still stood exactly where it always had, its twin spires rising above the square where the Panther had burned. Smooyer did not come alone. Waiting for him was Gustav Schäfer, the German tank gunner whose Panzer IV had also fired at the black car that afternoon. He had been 18 years old in 1945. He had carried the same image for nearly 7 decades. Neither man knew whose bullets had killed Käthe Esser, perhaps both, perhaps neither. In the chaos of that street, certainty had never existed. They met on the steps of the cathedral, 2 old men who had once tried to kill each other without ever knowing each other's names. There were no uniforms now, no weapons, only memory. Together, they walked to Käthe Esser's grave. Schäfer placed yellow roses on the stone. Smooyer knelt to do the same, losing his balance as his knees gave way. Schäfer caught him before he fell, holding him upright. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They stood there in silence, sharing a weight neither had ever been able to put down alone. Enemies once, brothers now, bound not by victory, but by the memory of a woman caught between them. The Panther that burned beneath Cologne Cathedral exists now only in photographs. The Pershing that destroyed it sits silent in a museum, its gun cold, its steel untouched by fear or memory. The film footage still plays, 45 seconds of smoke, fire, and victory, studied as a turning point in armored warfare. But the real legacy of that day was never about tanks. It was about men who survived a moment of violence and spent the rest of their lives trying to understand it. Every year since that meeting in Cologne, yellow roses have appeared on Käthe Esser's grave. Someone remembers, someone still apologizes. And somewhere between those stones and those memories, the war finally begins to end.